Today's speaker is Richard Hill. He's with the Indiana Society Sons of American Revolution. Some people may ask me, well, what does that mean? It's just like DAR, only we're the SAR. Daughters of American Revolution is the other group, and we're the Sons of American Revolution. We're kind of fortunate enough in this county, there's a club that meets 4 times a year, and we have about 100 members. It's Southern Indiana.
Yeah.
And so this county is the location of where we meet. We meet on our street at the Methodist Church 4 times a year. But the other activity we do is about 20 plus parades per year. And how do we get that many parades? Well, not everybody does every parade. Like if there's a parade in Evansville, perhaps most of the people might be from southwest Indiana, or New Albany would be a little different. But SAR, the Revolutionary Flag, this has to do with 1776. And ever since Mitchell had the 150th anniversary, SAR has been in the parade to carry the Revolutionary Flag. And that was when Mitchell had the 150th birthday. And so every year since then, that would be the first group of flags that go through, because there's several groups of flags that go through the Mitchell Persimmon Festival Parade. But today we have a doctor who does not have his medical license. He's actually a surgeon, and most towns, when I was in school, would have loved to have had a surgeon with his skill back in the 1700s. But it all starts with the Revolutionary War. So I want to introduce Richard Hill. He and I are one of the almost charter members of the SAR in this area. Doug Hill's from downtown Bryant'sville because his wife is from that area, but he migrated from Wisconsin. So Doug, I'm going to turn it over to you. We've got surgical instruments here that he started many years ago.
Yeah, I started about 1960 doing Civil War reenacting, and kind of worked my way into Rev War somehow. And at Fort Weatanon, which is Lafayette, Indiana, we were sitting around one day and somebody bet me that I couldn't come back the next year and put on a doctor's display. I did. The bet was for a 5th of Jack Daniels. At that time they were still allowing teepees at Weatanon. And it was an 18-foot teepee, and we had 35 people in it. It was cold that year. And I did taste it. I did get a taste of Jack Daniels. But by the time it got back around to me, it was empty. So anyway, that's how I got started in this, and I've been collecting ever since. If any of you have been looking in here, some of the fun tools that I have, if you have questions, please just ask. Anybody here in the medical profession? No? Oh, good. I won't traumatize you. They had a thing back then, and even if you've just been history or class or health class or something like that in school, you'll know that if you have pus coming from a wound, it's not good. Back then, they thought if you had laudable pus coming from an injury, that it was a great thing. All it meant was it was seriously infected. I don't know if you, I've got it here. Oh, by the way, my apron is pigskin. And this is, I'm ready, except for unbuttoning my cuffs and rolling my sleeves up, I'm ready to operate.
Volunteers?
Yeah, well. Well, back then, if you went to a doctor and he had a clean apron, he wasn't a very good doctor. He needed to have blood on his apron to show that he'd been knew what he was doing. And a lot of them wore frock coats to operate in.
Why is that?
Well, because they could take that off and hang it in the closet with all the blood and everything, the pus and whatever, on the apron or on his frock coat, and that would, show that he was a very experienced surgeon. And I didn't have a license, but I was apprentice trained. You had a young person came into a doctor's office as an apprentice, and he would be trained, would be basically like you'd have the apprentice, then you work your way up through the different grades, and after 12 years you would get a shingle, and they would give you a roofing shingle with your name printed on it and that you were a surgeon. Now they had 3 grades. You have a physician who, if you came to the physician to find out what's wrong with you, he would sit down with you on this side of the table at our desk, and you would be on that side, and he'd go, "And what are your symptoms?" He never touched the patient, never did anything. He would go to the apothecary. You had a druggist and an apothecary. A druggist was the person that went out and picked up the leaves, seeds, what have you, for drugs. And so the physician would write a prescription for you, and you would go to the pharmacist, get the prescription filled. If you needed an operation, he would call in the surgeon, and then the physician would sit on the high chair behind the physician and watch him operate. Fun and games. But we have all these tools. I know some of you have looked at them. Any questions on any of these that you might think of?
You said there are 3 grades, physician and surgeon, and what's the third one?
Well, you would have surgeon's mate.
Surgeon's mate?
Yeah. And it would be basically the same as a nurse. And it would be male. They didn't believe the women would be able to stand the sight of blood and all the agony that was going on. Little did they know.
So the surgeon was the senior member of that?
No, the physician was the senior member.
Physician was the senior.
The surgeon was under him.
That's why he supervised the physician.
Yeah, well,
Sort of.
he had no idea what was going on, but he'd sit up behind and get paid.
So what's the curved one?
What, you mean these knives?
Yeah.
These are amputation knives. How many people here have seen the movie The Patriot? All of you? If you noticed, right after he'd gotten through rescuing his son, they go to the American camp. As they're walking through the American camp, you see in the background an amputation being taking place. Okay, the surgeon is standing there, and the guy is yelling, "Don't take my leg, don't take my leg." And I'm going, "Don't worry, he's only going to bruise you." And everybody goes, "What?" I said, "Look at the way he's holding his knife." This is the sharp edge. You would cut and make a circular cut. Don't worry, the blades, all the blades in my kit are dull, because little kids will come up and they'll go, "What's this, mister?" Yeah.
So I assume that after they were finished with a surgery or procedure, they never sanitized or disinfected the tools. Maybe they washed them off.
Why?
But they didn't know to. They didn't know to do it, right? Back then.
My hands are perfectly clean. I washed them yesterday.
What kind of anesthesia did they use besides whiskey?
They knew not to use whiskey. I know John Wayne made he wrong. Sorry. Alcohol tends to dilate the blood vessels, and therefore it will bleed faster because they're opened up and the blood goes through them faster. So they would give laudanum after the operation simply because that would relax the person and hopefully keep him from going into shock. I know everybody gets a kick out of listening to this, but you're right. It is kind of funny. They did all this stuff, and then they look around and see how many people are living today. You kind of wonder, how do they get this many people? Well, the ladies will know childbed fever. The reason that happened was that the midwife, now the doctors did not treat women. If they were called in to check on a woman, it was very simple. The woman would sit in a chair over here, the doctor would sit in a chair over here, and they would take a large sheet, tie it around her neck and around his neck, and then he could examine the woman. The midwife took care of babies. The doctors didn't start doing anything with women until they found out that they could charge more money.
What's in the box?
Excuse me?
What's in the box?
Which one? This one? This one over here? Okay, I have my amputation saws in here. I have a file for filing the end of the bone off. After they saw through it, you file the bone down to keep bone spurs from causing abscesses. Then I have this one is a little syringe. They're all flushing syringes. You would wash out the ear, the eye, or the nose with this. For large gashes and so forth, they would use this one to flush out a wound from a bayonet or sword, tomahawk, that kind of thing. This is my fun one. I got this one. This is a clister syringe. You would fill this with the clister, and I have some recipes here if you care to hear them. They'd fill this with the clister, and then they would lubricate this with some lard or some grease of some kind, and have you bend over the table with your trousers down while they administered the clister.
I was interested in what the clister was until you got to that part. Now I know the recipe. Elixir.
What?
She's like, what is elixir?
A clister? If you look it up in Webster's dictionary, it's still in there. It is called today an enema. And then I have this one that I was gifted. Some friends of mine were in an antique place up in Indianapolis, and they found it. And they bought it and gave it to me because they said I needed it. This is an urethral clister. And what you did is you put the urethral clister in here, lubricated this again, and then you inserted it into the urethral tube to treat the stones.
Sorry I asked.
To treat the stones, your clister, the recipe for the clister for the stones is you take 10 ounces of Venice turpentine dissolved with the yolk of ½ ounce of yolk and a ½ ounce of Florence oil. Now, Florence oil is what we call
Cod liver oil?
No, Florence oil is olive oil. And this was mixed up, and then you would put it into this tube, and don't worry, it didn't hurt me a bit.
There are worse things than dying.
That's okay. No, we were talking about this, and you made a circular cut, and then you took this strap, put it around the bone, and pulled the flesh back up the bone, because you would move about an inch or so, or far enough up so there were no cracks in the bone, saw it off there, file it smooth so that it didn't have any sharp points on it, then take this and pull it back. At that point, you take this tool, which is an artery hook, and at that point you would release the tourniquet up here, and the blood vessels would start to ooze blood. You'd hook those, pull them out, and tie them off.
Literally tie them. Literally tie them.
Yes, you would, horsehair. You take the tail hair and you would soak it in water. Any good creek water would do, as long as it was 3 feet from the bank. You didn't want to get organic matter in the water. Then you just tie it off. I do have double retractor, and I have a single retractor for holding open wounds. And of course, scalpels. People ask me, why do you have a straight dagger in your kit? That's to show the problem was that in operating, the body will go into deep shock at about 8 minutes. And you cannot bring the person back from deep shock back then. So if you use a straight blade, you make a cut, you have to go back, make a cut, go back, make a cut, go back. You just wasted a whole lot of time. The circular cut was the best they could do. It wasn't until probably after they got ether that they started using straight amputation knives. The funny thing is, how many know what the formula for ether and when was it made? Any idea? Well, according to some of the information I have, ether is alcohol and sulfuric acid. That's why they grease your face when they start giving you ether. The Spanish developed this in 1561. So why didn't they use it before? They didn't know. It was in 1842 that they experimented with ether putting people to sleep. Chloroform was invented in 1841. So, yes?
So, can you finish the story about once you did the blood vessels, so?
Once you did the blood vessels and tied them off, you just had the hair or the strings or whatever you use, thread to tie them off. You left those kind of hanging loose, and you would put a pad over it and wrap it up.
You wouldn't sew it?
Oh no, it was completely raw. They just pulled the flesh back, and there would be where they'd cut it off. It wasn't until about 1848, I think it was, that they now were using straight amputation knives, and that I'll use a dagger to show. About the time of the Civil War, they learned that if you take the knife and push it clear through and cut forward, and then without taking it out of the wound, push down and go under the bone and make another cut forward, that you produced 2 flaps that were bent out of the way, saw it off, tied off the arteries. Then they would pull the flap closed and stitch it up. But that was the Civil War period, 1860s, 1850s actually, when they were doing that normally. So, but up until then it was cut around and leave a raw edge. This would heal over, and that's where the laudable pus comes from, because that would get infected. So.
What was the death rate from infections? Was it infection?
Yeah, well, they tried to take care of it as best they could by keeping water on the bandages. They would soak the bandage with water and let it, and it was creek water. Well, if you get it 3 feet out, it's not going to have any organic matter in it.
Make sure you get it upstream.
Oh yes, preferably upstream from a cow pasture. Yeah, well, that's another joke for. You didn't want to camp downstream from a cavalry unit. You know. But then I have a tool here. You may have heard me talking amputations, bloodletting, teeth drawn, and brain surgery while you wait. Well, this is a tool for brain surgery. If you have a patient that comes in and has been hit in the head with a musket butt, wood beam falling down, hitting him in the head, he's got a concussion, you would, and this is the easiest and most safe operation possible. They would cut open the scalp, retract it, scrape all the material off the scalp so you were down to the bone. You would take this tool, which is a trepanning bore, and you would find the crack where the bone was broken down, and you would bore a hole through the skull. Now that's been done clear back in the time of the Incas. They were doing that same operation, but they were leaving the evil spirits get out. But you would take the handle of the trepanning bore, and you would have your bone pressed down. You would stick this in the hole and elevate, pry the bone back up into place. Then if you were really, really, really wealthy, you would take a silver Spanish coin, pound it out so it was nice and flat, put it on there, drilled a couple holes in to fasten it down with screws, and pull the scalp back in place and stitch it up.
Well, the silver, I mean, that was the best possible.
Oh yeah, that was actually, but normally they just would take wool lint from the loom. You know, when if you've gone to the weaving down at Spring Mill, the woman is throwing the shuttle back and forth, and pulling it the other way and pull it. That makes some of the wool fibers fall off. And they would sweep that up off the floor, soak it in olive oil, Florence oil, and then you would pack that in the hole to fill it up, and then you would pull the skin back and stitch it up. The wool lint would eventually dissolve, so that wasn't a problem. They did find one skeleton up at Fort Weatanon at the University of Michigan came down and did an archaeological dig, and they found one skeleton that had the trepanning bore partially grown back. It wasn't completely grown back, but was partially grown back. And the archaeologist said, we think the reason that that wasn't completely regrown is the arrowhead lodged in the skeleton's spine. You think? Yeah, okay.
Anybody want to go back to the good old days?
Yeah, right. Well, okay. Anybody have bad teeth? At my age, I have bad teeth. Yeah. Okay. I have a tooth key. This is a tooth key, and this is set up the way it is for working on the lower left and upper right. And if I turn the hook around, pull the pin out, turn the hook, I can do the lower and upper on the other way. But what you did is you took this, you put it on top of the tooth to be drawn, you would drive this through the gum into the roots of the tooth, and then you would turn the key, ripping the gum loose from the tooth and drawing the tooth up and out of the mouth. Now, that sounds pretty bad, but think of it this way. The chances of you finding somebody to draw your tooth within 6 to 8 months of having it go bad was iffy. Because there weren't that many doctors, dentists, or anybody like that floating around that would be able to do that type of thing. Now, granted, the blacksmith would take a chisel and a hammer and knock it out, but that wasn't bad, I guess. I don't know. But your tooth had probably abscessed. And at this point, you were ready to do anything to get that out of there. So when you tore the gum loose and everything, it was allowing that abscess to drain.
We're going to take a pause right there.
Oh.
I know some people need to go back to work, so let's have the four-way test, and then we'll continue on. He can look and get more explanation.
I'm glad this program was